Good evening, everyone. My name is Zhang Yaqi, and my metric number is 230956009. It's my pleasure to present my research proposal here, and my title is English Symbols in a Rural Linguistic Landscape of China, exploring its impacts on rural consumption. Let's start with the introduction. The linguistic landscape study analyzes language use in public spaces and provides a physical methodology for studying linguistic representations in geographic contexts. In China, English appears frequently as an English symbol in people's consumption, serving as a global language and a valuable linguistic resource in the linguistic landscape. In Chinese rural spaces, English symbols are introduced into the monolingual environments of these areas, often eliciting different consumption practices. And lolling is one of the representative cases which will be discussed in this study. Previous research on linguistic landscape have revealed a bias towards the production and consumption of signage in urban environments, and there is a lack of research on how English symbols function and extend their influence in rural spaces, and to what extent they influence local consumption. So, we summarize our research objectives into R01 to examine the manifestations of English symbols in Lolling's linguistic landscape, and R02 to explore the impacts of English symbols on the consumption of rural spaces, so that we provide two research questions. RQ1, in what ways are English symbols manifested in Lolling's linguistic landscape? And RQ2, how do English symbols impact the consumption of rural spaces? Based on our research questions, we do our literature review and find that Landry and Bauhaus examine the significance of the linguistic landscape in linguistically diverse communities. Beyond this, Buckhouse, Lees, and Yuan's scholarly research on LL reviewed the consumption of symbols in urban settings but lacked research on rural spaces. Xiang examined the positive perceptions of Chinese urban consumers towards the emergence of multilingual linguistic landscape, especially English symbols, but lacked study into the attitudes of rural consumers. Do explore the impact of English symbol on tourism consumption in Hongcun, a representative township. However, there is still a shortage of research on the daily consumption in rural spaces. So, we go forward to the theory. We choose linguistic landscape as our theoretical framework, and it introduced that linguistic landscape refers to the visibility and prominence of language on public and commercial symbols in a particular area or region, and provides this explicit theoretical core for the linguistic landscape. According to this, Buckhouse and Ben Raffel stated that linguistic landscape data can be statistically coded into three patterns: types of signs, language combination patterns, and top-down or bottom-up signage. For the significance of the study, it makes up for the research gaps on informational or symbolic functions of English symbols in townships, and expands a depth and scope of linguistic landscape research. For the practical significance, the study draws attention to the linguistic landscape of rural spaces in China and raises the importance of English development. Meanwhile, it puts up the local consumption level through innovative ways of applying English symbols into the business of rural spaces. Let's go to the methodology part. The study will employ mixed methods, including qualitative research methods and quantitative methods, to examine the manifestations of English symbols in the linguistic landscape of Lolling, a rural space, and their impacts on local consumption. Step 1. Sampling. We use purposive sampling to select our regions and participants. We select three representatives for typical streets, including Municipal Street, Kaiyuan Middle Avenue, and street along National Highway 339. And for the participants, we select 10 participants, including 5 store operators and 5 local consumers from the about 3 streets. And we limit their age about 18 so that they have responsibility for their answers. And they must complete 9 years of compulsory education in the English subject in China so that they have sufficient English proficiency. Step 2. Instruments. We use digital camera to photograph English symbols appearing on the 3 streets, and statistical coding framework are used to categorize the English symbols into 3 patterns. And interview guides are necessary for the semi-structured interviews. Step 3. For the step 3, we discuss in 2 parts. Part 1 is image data collection, which firstly we limit our scope according to Ben Ruffle, and 3 typical streets related to study are summarized, including central commercial streets, along traffic categories, and traditionally community streets. And then we categorize our signs according to Backhouse and Ben Ruffle's categories, including types of signs, language combination patterns, and top-down to bottom-up signage. And the image data collected and classified will be used to analyze the manifestations of English symbols in the linguistic landscape of Laolin. Part 2. Semi-structured interview. Prior to the research, consent should be received from the RMREC, and participants should sign a consent form before the interview so that we consider our ethical consideration. And participants can choose face-to-face or telephone interviews depending on their time and preference, and the interviews with the store operators and consumers will be recorded and manually verbatim transcribed. And the data from interviews will be used to analyze the impacts of English symbols on consumption in rural spaces. And the last step is about the data analysis. We use quantitative analysis to summarize the frequency of English symbols in the Laolin streets. Frequency analysis is used to summarize the main manifestations of English symbols. And descriptive statistical analysis too is employed to present manifestations of these symbols. And 2. Qualitative analysis. We choose discourse analysis methods, especially semantic analysis, to find recurring themes and differentiating features in the interview data to explore the impacts of English symbols on local consumption. After that, we use cross-validation to ensure the data reliability. Also, there are still some limitations about the study. First of all, we log comparative analysis. A comparative analysis between the linguistic landscape of Laolin and similar township is insufficient, so makes it difficult to find the similarities and differences and hard to summarize accurate generalizability of the English symbols in the linguistic landscape of Chinese townships. For the sample bias, only the linguistic landscapes of the 3 typical streets are sampled, and no in-depth study of the other streets is conducted. In the lack of interviews with participants from other rural spaces may limit the generalizability of the findings. In summary, this study is significant in examining the linguistic landscape representations of English symbols in rural areas in China and their impacts on local consumption. Thanks for your listening. That's all.